Good morning, everyone, and happy Sunday. It was recently brought to my attention that with the current government shutdown going on, that there are many people who are dependent upon assistance for their food and for some, basic items. So I'd like to encourage everyone at this time, if you have it in your heart to give, please reach out to your local food bank or local drop-in center and give because we've been given the greatest gift of all, and it's always great when we can return some of the blessings. So my question to start off with today is, who remembers the movie Young Guns? I do. It's a great movie. For those who don't, it was a Western made in 1988 about a group of young men who become vigilantes to avenge the death of more or less their caretaker, their father figure. And it's a great Western, and it had everything a good Western needs. It had great fight scenes and horse chases, and a really good cast of characters. The cast included some of the big names of the day, such as Kiefer Sutherland, Charlie Sheen, and playing the infamous, Billy the Kid, Emilio Estevez. And I remember in one part of the movie, Estevez's character tells his fellow outlaws, we test ourselves every day, gentlemen, because when you stop testing yourself, you get slow, and then they kill you. In media, we can often glean little bits of truth, little bits of reflection on the things that we find in life. I would offer today a different vision for that same statement. We are tested by the devil every day. When we fail these tests, he wins. When we pass these tests, the Lord wins, and we do. So today's question for you is, where in your life are you being tested? Are you passing? Are you failing? What do you need to be successful, and what do you do when you do fail? Throughout the Old Testament, we see stories of test upon test upon test upon. They're all there. There's quite a few there. Adam and Eve were tested in the Garden of Eden, and as we all know, that one really didn't go so well. Abraham was tested when he was told to sacrifice his son Isaac. And let's not even get into discussing poor Job. Moses too was tested. First, he was told to stand before Pharaoh, the most powerful man in the known world of the day, and to demand that he release the Israelites. God tested him by having him lead the Israelites through the desert for 40 years. So many times Moses was tested, and it was only once, just once, that he slipped up and that he failed the test he was given. And for that, God told him that he would never enter the promised land. In one of the first instances when the Israelites thirsted for water, Moses appealed to God, and God told him, take up his staff and go out and to strike the rock with the staff. And when he did, God caused the rock to pour water, and every man and woman, child and beast drank their fill. Later, when this thirst returned, once again, Moses appealed to God. And God told Moses once again to take his staff, gather the people, but this time to speak to the rock, not strike it. But this time Moses' faith faltered, and instead of doing as he was instructed, he did what was familiar, and he struck the rock. He struck it once and nothing happened. And he struck it again, and finally water poured forth. Instead of doing as God has instructed him, he did what he thought would work. God did give the people water from the rock, but Moses had ultimately failed this test of faith. And for that, he would never enter the land of the covenant, the land that was promised to them. Now, in today's passage, we see Moses acknowledging the punishment for his failure. With the land in view, they are sitting on the hilltop, they can see it. He is having to hand over his position as leader of the Israelites to Joshua. And in doing so, Moses is pleading with Joshua, please don't make the mistake that I did. Don't let your faith stumble. Don't fail those tests. He's saying, be strong and bold, for you are the one who will go with this people into the land of the Lord that the Lord has sworn to their ancestors to give them. And you will put them in possession of it. By this statement, Moses is telling Joshua to be strong in his faith and to be bold in his faith. They're going to have to conquer armies that are entrenched, that have built fortifications. And yet Moses is saying, walk in the faith that God will give you victory. Don't falter. Be bold. How much more bold can you be in faith, in your faith in God, than proclaiming His name and His glory when the entire world tells you to give it up? And refusing to give up his faith, even when all seems lost, is exactly what we see when we read Paul's letter to Timothy. As I've said before, as we read his second letter to Timothy, Paul is sitting in prison. And as I said before, he's thinking that he might not get out this time, that this may just be his end. So he's trying to embolden, much like Moses was trying to embolden Joshua, he is trying to embolden Timothy to take up the mission, to take up the purpose of spreading the word of God. He's telling him to be strong and to be bold in his own faith, so he might pass whatever test is coming his way. Paul writes, I solemnly urge you, proclaim the message. Be persistent, whether the time is favorable or unfavorable. Convince, rebuke, and encourage with the utmost patience in teaching. That is a bold, strong statement, to be persistent, whether the time is favorable or unfavorable. We don't need to be persistent when things are going our way. It's always when we stumble that we are truly tested. And I ask, how many times is our faith tested? How often do we face those little instances that put our faith to the test? Simple decisions and truths. How often would it be easier to just go with the flow, put our faith aside and do what everyone else is doing? We have a culture that encourages self-indulgence rather than selfless sacrifice. We have culture in even schools where quite often to proclaim faith in God and faith in Jesus will make you an outcast, even in some ways excommunicated from the group. These are those who have given in to the words of the devil, who have given in and who have failed tests of faith quite often. They have eaten the fruit of temptation and turned their eyes away from God and turned their eyes upon themselves instead, replacing the worship of the Almighty with the worship of themselves. Paul addresses this as well. He tells Timothy, for the time is coming when people will not put up with sound teaching, but have their ears tickled. They will accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own desire, and they will turn away from listening to the truth and wander away to myths. Well, I'd venture to say that the time that Paul speaks of is right now. Often tests and trials we go through aren't as extreme as facing death by the sword or imprisonment as he was, as Paul was. Most of the time, the trials that we go through are just simple moments we encounter every day. Every day we have the opportunity to do as we have been commanded by the Lord or to not. One of the first full-time jobs I had when I moved here to Colorado was working at the Correctional Center in Burlington. And it was kind of customary to work in the unit control rooms when you were brand new. And one evening I was doing just that in one of the housing units. And the other officer that I was working with, the guy kind of wandering the floor, was an officer named Mike. I was watching Mike. I was watching him very closely because he'd had an encounter with an inmate that was very, kind of tense. He was enforcing the rules, and imagine that, the inmate didn't really like it, didn't really want to follow the rules. So Mike was coming out of one of the housing units, and as he turned to close the door, the inmate hauled off and kicked the door hard, jamming it into Mike's hand. So we did as we were supposed to do. We called people down there, and they took the inmate and they put him into confinement. And Mike was taken to get some medical attention, and they diagnosed him with a sprained wrist. And of course, there was paperwork to be done and reports to write. And I did my part, writing down exactly what I saw. The next evening, our captain came down to the unit where I was working. He had my report in his hand. And he told me that I did not see the inmate kick the door. And that Mike was making the whole thing up. He told me that I needed to change my report to reflect that. It turns out that the captain didn't like Mike very much. And he thought that if he could get me to falsify the report, he could then accuse Mike of doing the same thing and get him fired. And I was a brand new officer. I didn't really like having to stand up to a captain, but I looked him in the eye and I said, I know what I saw, and what happened is reflected in the report that I wrote. In this case, I was tested, and I refused to back down. I refused to lie, even in the face of someone who, in many ways, had my job in his hand. These are the tests that we can face on a day-to-day basis. Now, thanks be to God, I passed this one. My integrity held out. Even as a brand new officer, I had stood against the captain, a person of a great authority, and told him that I would not do as he wanted, and that I was going to do what was right. Mike kept his job, and the company gave him paid for the medical attention that he needed to get healthy again. Brothers and sisters, we are tested every day. Moses was tested, Joshua was tested, Paul and Timothy were tested, and you and I are tested every single day. Once again, these tests are often not as extreme as Job or even as extreme as Rahab. Most days, these tests are simple choices. We have the choice to tell the truth or to lie. We have the choice to listen to hard truths or to words that tickle our ears. We have the choice to draw ourselves closer to God or to turn our backs from Him. I choose God. I choose to follow God in times of abundance, in times of trial. And so should you. When we fall upon the lessons of Jesus Christ, no matter the test, we will pass. And you know what? Even if we fail, even if we have those moments of weakness, God is there, as He's always been. He has given us forgiveness for the times that we fail. He's given us strength for our times of trial. He has given us the grace and the blessing by the blood of His own Son, our Messiah, Jesus Christ. Amen. To one and all, I hope you have a great week. I will see you next Sunday. God bless.